Welcome! My name is Miranda Adams, and today I will be sharing with you my Project 2 for my English Literature course. And this presentation is on analyzing and comparing the plot and theme in a story. So despite its somewhat misleading name, the text I will be analyzing is a poem which is written by Lee Young Lee, and it's titled A Story. But before we get into kind of what the plot and theme of this poem really is, I think it's important to kind of distinguish the differences between plot and theme. So in all of literature, plot is what the text is about. This tends to be objective, and it's pretty situational to the storyline and characters because it's what's actually happening in the story or the poem. And so this creates a storyline, and because of this, the actual events are normally happening in chronological order. Themes, on the other hand, don't really provide characters' names or details from the plot, but instead they're more of what the text means. So they are subjective, and they're applying outside of the characters' lives, and they kind of connect the story to life by presenting a lesson or universal idea that's stated in full sentence form. And this will address the rhetorical situation, which is essentially why the author is writing what they're writing and what they mean by the plot. So this is also important to note that you kind of have to understand the plot first to infer what a theme means, because a theme is what the author is communicating using the plot. This is very similar to other symbolic analysis because you must understand the literal meaning of something first before you can infer its figurative one. So that said, that's kind of the differences between plot and theme, and understanding this, we can kind of get into more of the specifics of the poem. So a play, which is the poem, opens with a troubled father who's struggling to come up with a new bedtime story for his 5-year-old son, who's sitting on his lap, waiting eagerly, asking, "Not the same story, Baba, a new one." And this leaves the father somewhat stunned as he rubs his chin and scratches his ear, and he's really sad because he can't come up with a new story. This creates a conflict for the speaker, which is the father's inner monologue, and we can discern that the setting is the boy's bedroom because it takes place in a room full of books. The rising action forms as the father's fears grow and start to consume his thoughts, which therefore consume the text of the poem. And the fact that he cannot compose a new story makes him fear that his son will give up on his father. So that's his fear, and that's what creates the conflict of the poem. The father then begins to kind of overthink his situation by imagining future scenarios where, once again, his son gives up on him. And the author writes, he sees the day this boy will go. Don't go, hear the alligator story, the angel story once more. You love the spider story, you laugh at the spider, let me tell it. So the rising action further develops as the father is imagining his grown son packing his shirts and looking for his keys as he leaves home. And these fears start to grow, and this creates the climax of the poem, which is the peak of the father's terror. Lee writes, "The man screams, yet he is mute to his son's hearing." The father feels unable to appease his son when the speaker says, "Am I a god that I should never disappoint?" The climax here is that the father feels like he can't contribute to his son's expectations or meet them. So as a falling action, which is kind of seen as like the peace after the storm of the man's biggest fears, the poem refocuses into present day in that son's bedroom. So the readers are taken back to the son's bedroom, and the poet grounds his speaker by writing, "But the boy is here." And the resolution of this dynamic father character is a deeper understanding of his situation. He kind of comes to realize that this moment is an emotional rather than logical equation, and it is a natural occurrence for all families, as it's earthly rather than heavenly. And then finally, the poem ends in silence. So this is the storyline of the poem, or the plot, and we can kind of take a deeper meaning from the plot's events and elements, but again, to reiterate, themes are subjective, and the same literature can mean two different things to two different people. So what follows is kind of just the theme that I've come up with, and this is kind of what it means to me. So the next 2 slides are kind of just a process of how I came up with a theme. So as I'm sure all readers can relate, stories shape childhoods. So the story that the son is asking for kind of becomes a symbol to this father that he can't contribute anything else to his son's childhood. The setting is also very symbolic, as it creates kind of a common scenario of a parent reading a bedtime story to their child. And this kind of represents safety, teaching, and love as an adult kind of shares their wisdom with their offspring. This also creates an interesting power shift from the parent to the child. When the dad says, "Are you a God?" the man screams, "that I sit mute before you. Am I a God that I should never disappoint?" Here, the father is kind of looking up to the son and asking, "Why can't I appease you?" And this is somewhat of an ironic element in the poem, because there's a wise adult that is more fearful than the child. A lot of imagery is created when the son is leaving home, which is created in the father's mind and therefore the reader's. And when the poet writes, "But the boy is here," he is urging the reader to be present, because the future is inevitable and seems to come quickly. So when readers are brought back to the boy's bedroom towards the end of the poet is urging us all to be present, because the father is trying to skip ahead to the future, but he needs to be present. So the author also stresses that these moments and feelings are common, which is why the son's question is referred to as an earthly rather than heavenly one. And I would say that the ending of the poem was probably the most difficult for me to kind of understand and analyze, just because of its wording. But after you kind of look into more of its meaning, it's probably the most symbolic portion of the poem. The poet writes, "A boy's supplications and a father's love add up to silence." So the poet leaves the poem in silence at the very end. And I believe this is because the boy is begging for independence because his father has nothing left to teach him. And the father loves his son, so he is silent by letting the boy go. The father's love causes him to set his son free, despite how painful it is for him to see him leave. To kind of formalize what the theme of this poem is, we were taught to ask 2 questions. So what the poem is about, I kind of came up with the idea that it's all about parenthood. The second question is, what does this poem say about parenthood? And so my final theme that I created was, one of the biggest challenges of being a father is recognizing and accepting when it is time to let your child go and be independent. So from all of this, that is my Works Cited page. That is just the online version of the poem, and that's all I have to share. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.